Because many of the essential bin Laden books lack a thorough assessment of the primary sources, it is worth looking at a few of the pieces of what has become common wisdom in America in regard to al-Qaeda and bin Laden, a common wisdom that is based primarily on these books and the words of politicians. In my own work, I have found that these conclusions often wither to inaccuracy after a comprehensive assessment of primary sources. One of the most common pieces of common wisdom, if you will, is the central importance of radical modern Islamic theorists on the thought of Osama bin Laden. Most often cited is the Egyptian Sayyid Qutb from the 1950s and 60s. This theorist of jihad portrayed jihad as a Hobbesian war of all against all. Qutb is seen in the West as the principal shaper of bin Laden's thought and actions. But in the corpus of bin Laden's work, there is not a single quotation from Qutb, nor does bin Laden ever even mention his name. That bin Laden accepts some of what Qutb said is clear. As long as Qutb does not stray from the Salafist view of the Quran and the Sunnah, the sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, bin Laden concurs with him. But this is really no more than saying that the Quran and the Sunnah are central to bin Laden and most Muslims. When Qutb diverges from these sources, bin Laden clearly has no use for his recommendations and does not deign to even refer to him. The idea that a direct line can be drawn from Qutb's rather odd and extraordinarily violent interpretation of Islam and bin Laden's traditional jihadi Salafism simply cannot be substantiated. By studying and analyzing Qutb and most other 20th century theorists of jihad, we learn much about the radicalizing milieu in which bin Laden's generation was reared, but almost nothing about the mature bin Laden's thought and motivation. A second piece of common wisdom is that Ayman al-Zawahiri, bin Laden's deputy, is really the eminence grise behind bin Laden. Western politicians and writers often refer to al-Zawahiri, the former Egyptian Islamic Jihad chief, as bin Laden's brain. An examination of bin Laden's work, however, reveals no significant impact by the Egyptian on his thought or his rhetoric. Indeed, such an assessment clearly delineates how far bin Laden has drawn al-Zawahiri away from his original positions and strategy. As with Qutb, bin Laden does not quote al-Zawahiri in his own statements, but he does stand with him as long as the Egyptian sticks to the above-mentioned foundational documents of Salafism. It is worth noting that bin Laden appears to have little use for any self-taught Islamist scholar. Like the English major Qutb, the surgeon al-Zawahiri, or the Egyptian Islamic Jihad's electrical engineer turned Islamist theorist Muhammad al-Faraj. Bin Laden's respect is reserved for those scholars who have received a traditional and formal Salafist education via universities or private study with Islamist scholars, men such as Abdullah Azzam and Abu Muhammad al-Maqdisi. Ironically, bin Laden does not even usually refer to these scholars, even though he respects them. There is really no need to quote them directly. By simply quoting the Quran and the Sunnah, he is in essence quoting those scholars by putting credit where it belongs, in the hands of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad. Something we've heard in recent years, and especially from General Petraeus and his counterterrorism advisor, David Kilcullen, the Australian soldier, is that al-Qaeda is outside the parameters of the acceptable parameters of Islam, and they are indeed what are called takfiris. In other words, Muslims who take it upon themselves to decide if another Muslim is a good Muslim or not, and if the answer is negative, they are free to kill him and take his property. In a review of bin Laden's work, there's nothing but a thorough and unequivocal denunciation of takfiri doctrine. He repeatedly and effectively attacks those, especially the Saudi regime spokesman, who identify him or other al-Qaeda figures as takfiris. That said, bin Laden clearly recognizes and respects the massively negative impact on al-Qaeda if the Saudis or others succeeded in making the takfiri label stick. Bin Laden and his lieutenants seldom deign to respond to criticism or accusations from Western states or Arab tyrannies. But when accused of takfirism, he, Zawahiri, and other senior al-Qaeda leaders have been quick to rebut the accusations. Bin Laden clearly and very accurately foresees oblivion for al-Qaeda and its allies if the Muslim masses come to believe that they are takfiris. His concern is evident in that he twice used public statements to implicitly apologize to Muslims for the takfiri actions of al-Qaeda's commander in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and to assure them that they would not occur again. I assure Muslims in particular, I assure Muslims in general and our people in the neighboring states to Iraq in particular, bin Laden said in apology for al-Zawahiri's actions in late 2007, that they will henceforth see nothing from the Mujahideen in Iraq but all that is good, God willing. We are your sons. The Muslim victims who fall in operations against the infidel crusaders or their usurper Iraqi agents are not intended targets. God knows that we are deeply saddened when some Muslims fall victim. Yet we hold ourselves responsible and seek God's forgivenesses for that. We beseech God to have mercy on the fallen and let paradise be their final abode.